Welcome to today's issue of freearkansas.com podcast, and I'm here with my co-host Matt Duffield. Matt, how are you doing?
Man, I'm doing great, Andy. I know I'm jealous of you. I'm envious because you are in Las Vegas.
It's all work, brother. All work and no play.
That's what everyone says in Las Vegas.
All work and no play. Yeah. You know, it's like many industries. They've got a big conference here in Vegas, and if you want to network, it's a great place to do that. And
where are you staying at?
I'm actually at the Fontainebleau. It's the new hotel, and it's actually by the convention center, a little off the strip, so a little quieter, and walking distance, which makes it a little easier. And yeah, so it's all good, and the weather is really nice. It's like 65.
Hey, quick history on the Fontainebleau where you're at, Andy. You may or may not know this, and this would have been, I've got to think the time frame, probably 20 years ago. The Fontainebleau was part of this project. These guys, and there's a documentary on YouTube. It's really fascinating. But they were going to put the largest structure in Las Vegas in the history of the town. And if they had ended up building it, it would be today by and large the largest. It was going to be this astronomical endeavor to build not just a hotel, but they had, it was acres upon acres of things. It was a golf course and all this stuff. But I remember it was a really hot topic back now 15, 20 years ago. And the project was in limbo for years because they just couldn't get the financing to complete it. I remember the Koch brothers got involved for a while, and I'm not sure who ultimately completed it. If it was those guys.
Koch brothers.
So the Koch brothers ultimately did it.
Koch brothers did it.
They changed the plans, and it was not nearly the undertaking it was going to be because it just didn't make financial sense. But so now they finally opened the Fontainebleau where you're at. I think last year.
I think they spent. I heard this. I don't know if this is right, but $9 billion on this place, and it's just that to me it's got more zeros than I'm used to. A few more zeros, so it's just hard for me to picture like $9 billion. Like, how does that break down?
And the Fontainebleau also is in Miami, correct? Is this like
I think so. I think there's another one in Miami as well. I don't know if I assume they're together, but I actually don't know that. You know, it's so.
That's really interesting. If for everybody watching, if you get a chance, check out the documentary on the Fontainebleau in Vegas. If you enjoy looking at massive structures being built or some of the Vegas promotional ideas, it's really fascinating. But anyway, I didn't mean to get off on all that. But it's good to see you, Andy.
Yeah, well, it's good to see you as well. And I'll just go ahead and give a little preface here. So at Free Arkansas, what we're trying to do is have a free exchange of ideas on different topics that impact our state, all in service of how do we make the state better. And we think that's a noble pursuit. Today we're going to talk about hunger with children, and so food insecurity, another way to say it. But before we do that, what's been going on?
Well, we're going to talk about food, and the other side of that coin, Andy, and I always think it's an interesting discussion, is we're going to talk about food insecurity, and we're also going to talk about obesity, which we also rank high in. So anyway, we'll get into that. But Andy, I know you're more of a caviar guy, and I'm more of a chicken fried steak. But you know what I mean. But I was going to, I've hesitated to bring this up, but I just got to bring it up because I know I'm surely not the only person out there. But when I was a kid, my family would take me out to eat. It was always an enjoyable experience. You never left thinking, man, I wish we had not eaten there. Or it was just whatever. Maybe the steak was a little tough or something of that nature.
Right.
But Andy, I promise you, if I were in Vegas with you, it'd probably be the same way. But if you go out and eat with me, there is going to be an employee at that restaurant that's going to sweep within 1 feet to 2 feet of my feet. That's a lot of feet. It's a lot of footage of cleaning. But they're going to sweep by my feet while I'm trying to eat. And Andy, it's driving me nuts. I mean, my friends, it's turned into a joke with all my buddies. We go out and eat, and there's going to be somebody come by with a broom and sweep by my feet while I'm trying to eat. Does this happen to you?
No, but I will tell you what did happen this morning. It's another little pet peeve, just like you. Of course, I like iced tea a lot, and I can't just have one glass of iced tea in the morning. I need multiple cups of iced tea. And I was in the table in the corner at the breakfast location, and so they didn't pay a whole lot of attention to me. And so I had to actually get up and I didn't get my own tee, but I got really close, and so.
Yeah.
But sweeping on your shoes, that's like,
It's all
like, is this something where people are throwing stuff on the ground and they're just trying to move it, or are they just
I
like
don't know.
cleaning and they just not paying any attention?
Well, you remember there was an old saying, Andy, back in the day. All these old sayings, I don't hear them much anymore, but I think they're still applicable. But there was an old saying you used to hear: if you have time to lean, you've got time to clean. That's what they would tell employees. If you've got time, you need to clean it. Well, it's like now all of a sudden they're taking that not just to heart, but they're taking it to the extreme to where they're annoying patrons with it. I mean, it's just got to where you've got people sweeping in the middle of tables while they're trying to eat dinner now. And it's like, man, can you not wait? And I don't recall when I was a kid or even 5 years ago, if I went out and ate, that never happened. I think you would sweep like at the end of your shift, or maybe if it began. Or I mean, if a kid or anybody made a huge mess, okay, get the broom out, let's clean it up. Or if there's a broken glass, but I mean, they're just sweeping dust off the ground all around, Andy. I mean, it's just, but I think it's just, again, a reflection of society where we're at, and the common sense is not so common anymore. But
we need a bill. We need a bill on this. We need some legislation,
Well, if it's,
because I know there's another pet peeve that bothers you a lot, right? Using this, making a lot of noise in public places.
Yeah. So,
and that's a cell phone I'm holding up for the.
Well, and I'm going to say this again, one of my slogans has been, I'm here to solve problems, not create more. And that was true with legislation. I try to do it within life, but with legislation. And so I actually had a bill draft, and it was called the Peaceful Meal. It was going to be called the Peaceful Meal Bill, because I was so annoyed. I mean, I was to say it, then you'd go out and eat, and there's somebody with their phone or a tablet or whatever, and they get it on full blast. They've got their kids watching videos on full blast, or they're having a conversation on full blast with a FaceTime without a care in the world, 2 foot from everybody else trying to enjoy their meal with their family, and they're on this thing. So I actually drafted a bill, ended up not pursuing it. Get into that a little bit more too if you want. But basically what it was going to do, it was just going to give restaurants the letter of the law. It was not creating a crime, so you couldn't charge these people. But if I were a restaurant owner, Andy, which I'm not and probably never will, but I would love to have a sign that my manager, myself, or employees could point to and say, look, man, it's a state law. You're going to have to turn this thing down. That might not be the initial approach, but if they continue. But just, have a little respect for people, take headphones in or something else, but blaring this. So anyway, really got on my nerves. So I actually got a draft together. I ran it by the Hospitality Association. They had some interesting conversations. They were actually going to be neutral on it. I ran it by, the online community just to get some comments, and most of them were very supportive of the idea, just to try to have, so restaurants could have some teeth. I had some conversations with some local restaurants, and it was really surprising. They didn't really seem to care either way. And I'm like, well, if the industry doesn't care, then I'm not going to, then I guess I'm not going to do it. But it doesn't negate the fact, Andy, that a tablet or a loud FaceTime in the middle of a restaurant is, in my opinion, it's poor manners, and people don't need to do that.
I experience it in a different way sometimes, where I'll be on a public place, like on an airplane. This happened to be last week, and the guy behind me has earbuds in, but he's talking, so I can't hear what the other people are saying, but I can hear him, and he's. I don't know the whole decibel chart, but like his decibels were probably like 3 or 4 times louder than they needed to be, and so I could hear his entire conversation. And so it's just super obnoxious, and so I'm assuming that most
the airplanes, they make the announcement, right?
This is before they were loading the plane, so he did get off the plane at the right time, but it was just like he was having a conversation amongst all of us. It was just a little much, but let me switch gears for a second. So I think you'll agree with this, maybe. I don't know, like we are what we eat. Would you agree with that?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, me too. I mean, I think that I want to talk about a serious issue, but maybe even come at it coming in a couple of different directions, maybe even comically. I cannot remember the name of this movie, but there's a cartoon movie where something's happened on Earth, and they're out on a spaceship, like trying to find the next planet they can live on. And somewhere in the show, it shows like the captains of the ship over the generations. And the very first ones are like buff and they look tough, and then they get fatter and doughier as time goes on. And I wonder if somebody were looking at us over the last 100 years, if they wouldn't just say, we've gotten a lot doughier. I mean, and and I'm not trying to shame anybody in any way, but we're fatter. I mean, by all measures, and I actually don't think that people want to be fat, but I'm not trying to shame anybody, but I'm just curious, do you buy that logic?
What will explain? What logic are you asking?
Well, one, do you think that we've gotten fatter, our weight is, obesity has gotten worse, not better?
I think in most areas, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And interject just another little statistic I saw. This has been several years ago. So in Mexico, I watched a documentary on Mexico, and when Coca-Cola was introduced into Mexico on a large scale, their obesity went through the roof in Mexico. And I'm not blaming just Coca-Cola for it. There's a lot of factors in this we'll get into. But yeah, I mean, not just in America per se, but in Mexico it has. I know some places, Andy, at least you would know better than I because I know you spend more time out there. But I hear Colorado's relatively healthier than most states in this country as far as that. But yeah, I think it's our portions are larger. I'm not an expert on this, but a lot of the additives they're putting in food, and they create this more of an addiction to it. Like there was a movie, Andy, did you see? Oh man, I just went blank. The gentleman that made it, just Super Size Me was the name.
Yeah, of course.
And he ate McDonald's 3 times a day for a month, and it wasn't just on McDonald's. It could have been
any fast food, really.
Fat foods, right? And at the end of the month, he was wrecked. I mean, he had incoming fatty liver disease. He had gained over 20 pounds. He felt terrible. That's the big thing, how you feel. But I say all that to answer your question. No, I don't think anyone wants to be quote fat. No one does.
Well, and I would say too that obesity, and this is common sense, I think, but I don't know what the direct percentages are, but obesity and obesity related diseases, let's just say diabetes, or is a big contributor for Medicaid and Medicare. Right, in a lot of ways. Now, Medicare may be a little bit different because we're dealing with elderly people, but my guess is that if there was a pie chart of how it's spent, that some of these things all contribute. And so here in Arkansas, we rank on a youth level. So our we're one of the most obese states in the United States, and I don't know if you have the actual data in front of you, but Arkansas consistently ranks on the top of adolescent obesity. And what's interesting about this, and we're getting to the topic of the day, is that it also coincides in our case, and this is true in other places, with high food insecurity, meaning you don't have enough money to get the food that you need. You got a perspective on why you think that is? What do you think the contradictions? What do you think the reasons are, if you had to guess?
Well, Andy, I mean, it's a loaded topic. I mean, from my perspective, so I'll give an example. So, Andy, I joke about I've tried to do everything to actually keep from having to actually work a regular job. So one time in my early 20s, I actually, looked at being a personal trainer and dabbled in it a little bit. And so I have a lot of friends in that industry now. And again, it's an industry, right? They market. It's a huge mega $1 billion industry that markets all these different, quote, health food products. But at the end of the day, the scientific conclusion is it's your food that you take in and the amounts. So I actually saw there was a professor at a college, and perhaps Misty can add this in later, find the study he did. But he actually did a study himself, and he was on a reduced calorie diet. I don't recall the exact number, but part of his diet, he was eating Little Debbie's every day. Now, It may have been 1-2 Twinkies or whatever, and he incorporated that in. I think he drank a protein shake every day, but he had this deal, and he actually lost weight. He lost a substantial amount of weight, and his lipid panel was actually better. And I say that to say I think there's this misconception of, well, you have to eat certain things to be healthy and lose weight. And from my perspective and from what I've seen from the scientific community, it comes down more to the amounts of the foods. So going back to your question on where food insecurity and obesity is, how these can be compared.
The paradox, right? How can one be true and the other one be true? You'd think if you had food insecurities, you wouldn't get enough calories. I mean, that'd be the thought process. So It's a paradox.
Well, these cheap foods, and some of the notes Misty mentioned, Oreo cookies or a bag of chips or whatever. Well, if you just compare, for example, a bag of regular Lay's potato chips versus, if you put a couple of red skin potatoes in an air fryer or whatever, there's just more calorie. It's a calorie dense food. And so a lot of these cheaper, quote, junk foods, they're just calorie dense, man. I mean, I'm sure you've done this, Andy. Any red-blooded American is gone through and plowed an entire sleeve of Oreo cookies. I actually had a friend that knew the number of Oreo cookies.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I think cheap calories, cost-wise cheap, are mostly unhealthy calories, and it's more expensive to buy a tomato. And I believe I'm right when I say that, like, a sugar molecule and an alcohol molecule process the same way. And I think you're just going to crave it more, like an addiction, where you're going to want that. I mean, I think all of us know, and I think this would be true for me if I was being honest, if I had a sleeve of Ritz crackers or a tomato and I was hungry and they were both there, I probably have enough discipline at times to just eat the tomato, but not always. And I can tell you I'd probably choose the Ritz crackers if it was just like for taste alone. Because how can you not like Ritz crackers?
Well, and Andy, too, I think our taste buds. So, and I'm going to quote, where you're at out in Vegas. If I was in Vegas for 4 days and I was just eating, pizza on the street, every buffet, going out to Heart Attack Grill out there, that's a neat place if you haven't been, Andy. Yeah. I think people that are 350 pounds or over eat for free. That's a whole other topic.
That's a whole nother thing.
But you eat all that and you come back, and on Monday morning, you get up. I make my eggs with no oil, some hash browns with no oil, some dry toast. It tastes like nothing because you've been eating all these flavorful foods, sweets, and high-fatty foods and everything. You come back and eat that. It tastes like eating a piece of cardboard. Now, after a few days, you kind of get back in the swing and say, it's okay. It tastes good again.
So here's the other things I think you could. So the people say about this paradox. One is there's a cycle of depravity and then overeating. So I don't have a bunch of food, but then when I get food, I gorge. And there's a stress element to the whole thing, that I'm worried I don't have enough food. And so food can be comforting. And then, potentially you could make an argument about more limitations to physical activity, and so they would say when this hunger-obesity paradox, that it's the body's biological responses to things like scarcity, the social environmental factors, etc. And so what's also tough about here in Arkansas is that 1 in 4 children, 1 in 4 have food insecurity. And while I'm sure there's a technical definition for what that means, but basically they have hunger and nutrition concerns, and that's been rising. And so the state's trying to do a lot of things about it. There's free breakfast programs at school. There's lunch programs at school. And even Sarah Sanders had an executive order related to this. So, but what's interesting today is there's an article in the Wall Street Journal that talks about the summer gap. And so the summer gap really reflects, hey, I can't be at school, so I can't get that free meal. What are we going to do? And interestingly, a lot of states reject this money. Here in Arkansas, we don't reject it, but a lot of Republicans have a view that there's different views, but one is, and I'm just curious how you think about this being, a Republican in the legislature. How these sort of ideas land on you. So, so some of these are quotes from the various people in this article, but basically they say, one, the state is much more capable of handling this than the federal government. Two, they say things like, hey, if we just keep giving this to people, they'll never pull themselves up by the bootstraps. And I'm paraphrasing that. And so what are your thoughts on those two things?
I think it's, Andy, I think it's like most things in life. The pendulum typically swings too far one way or the other. So I was sharing this with someone the other day, about life in general and work ethic. And so my dad's generation, right? My dad was born back in 1940, and he worked really, really hard, in the sand and gravel business. He drove a dump truck with his dad. Well, point is, if my dad didn't work and he didn't make money, we weren't going to eat.
Right.
That's it. We didn't have food. Well, now, if someone says, you know what, I'm not going to work, they can find food. They're going to find food. And I think so. I think people get in situations all the time, and they may need a little bit of help and move forward. I think that's great to help someone that finds himself in that predicament. What I don't think is great is when someone's in that predicament and they choose to stay there and not work and not be productive for themselves. And I'll say this, just as a human being, if you're not doing productive things and you don't feel a sense of accomplishment, you're going to be a miserable person. So if you're going to just continually give and give and give, and that person is not improving themselves as a human being, it's really not helping that person in the long term, in my view.
Yeah, I definitely agree in this sense that, well, let me back up. There's this narrative out there at times that if you have any success, that it's luck. It's just pure luck. It's the genetic lottery that you were born into in your family. You're born in the United States. Maybe you might, a host of other lucky things that happen to you. And as a result, then the conclusion is, it didn't really matter that it was you. You're just this guy that just got something, or this person that got something. And I definitely think there's luck to everything that happens, but I also believe in, personal responsibility and having to, sacrifice and to give something back. So I do think that a climate where there's everybody expects to be given them, I don't think in the long run that's healthy. Now, with that said, I definitely think that there are people that really need the help, and children would be one area that we have this. So here's how this program works. EBT is the name of it. It stands for Electronic Benefits Transfer. And, and so the article really focused on Tennessee, which was thinking about not taking this. And so what are they not taking? Well, they're basically not taking $84 million that then flows to the families of about 70,000 kids in the form of $120 per child, as these gaps, to fill in the gaps of the summertime. And then the article, they quote all sorts of food banks, et cetera, talking about the issues associated with this. Arkansas took the money, but we also don't have, our funds aren't limitless, right? And so that's a real issue. Where do you stand on that? Do you have a perspective that, like, if you were magically the governor tomorrow, would you take the money? Would you be like Texas and Tennessee and say, no, we're going to row our own?
Well, that's a good. Well, for one, I can't answer that without Andy. We talked about this. We're both small business owners and bottom line guys. I'd have to look at way more of the overall budget before I could answer that. But I'll say this. A big topic this last session was on free breakfast for students. So, we passed a bill that will provide a free breakfast for every public student in the state of Arkansas, right? And that came from tax money generated from medical marijuana. And so with myself, Andy, not being in the school system, I love to get a perspective from those in the legislature who do. And one of those people was Representative Zach Gramlich, who's from Fort Smith, Arkansas. He's a school teacher there. Fantastic guy, works hard. My gosh, he worked so hard this session on some great stuff. So I went with him, I went to him and spoke with him on this free breakfast deal. And he said, Matt, it's a real problem. He said, these kids are coming to school. He said, their parents aren't feeding them. He said, they're sitting there. He said, they barely keep their eyes open. They have no energy because, as you know, and Andy, if you don't eat, my mama used to say, if you don't eat, something's wrong. Right. So
Right.
if they're not getting nutrition in, they can't think, they can't learn. And Zach really opened up my eyes to this issue of these students who get there, they get dropped off earlier than a lot of kids at the school. They have a poor home life, and so I voted for that legislation. I said, hey, let's give them a free breakfast. There were some that on the other side of the coin, there were a few, and I think they had some valid concerns. But what about the millionaire's kid getting the free breakfast and all that? And I'll say this, there's no such thing as a perfect law. And
of course
we're trying to do the best we can. And if there's some kids, and again, these are kids, they can't help what they're born into. Andy, you brought up luck. Some kids, they're not born into a great home situation, and that's right. a sad nature.
That's right. Yeah, there's got to be some balance to it. But I definitely, it's hard not to be empathetic to the plight of a child that's born into some of it's just practical, right? Like I've got two parents that are working, let's just say they're working in jobs that don't pay a lot of money, and they're working nights. So the kid comes home and has to feed themselves. That's another issue, right? Can you imagine, like I grew up in a family where my mother cooked for me, but I can only imagine what it would be like if your mom just leaves like some Oreos out for you, right? And that's your dinner. Right. And you're not learning good habits. Right. There's another thing about that. Right. You're learning bad habits, but you don't know any different. Right. Because the situation is just what it is for them to make it work. So I don't know if the other states have other ways of handling this because they have to have some of the exact same issues. But, basically, you've got here's one of the quotes, they called it a nanny state that kills self-reliance and turns families into beggars, and so, and that was somebody that was opposing it in Idaho, one of the Republican state senators, actually. So
they don't mess around in Idaho. Where they
turning
stand.
Everybody into beggars. I can't, I don't really know, but I don't know. I look at this and I say, this is all why. What we're doing is so important, Matt. And the reason is that we're not suggesting we're going to have brilliant ideas that will be surfaced tomorrow that can change the boat on a dime. But maybe what we can do is surface some ideas that over the next decade or 2 decades do something really interesting. And what I would say is that we're in an arms race for jobs, and we're going to have people with food insecurities everywhere. But if we can create more jobs that are high quality jobs, we can bring the boat up and we can lower these numbers in effective ways. So,
Sure.
Hopefully those are some of the things that we can do,
Well, last week we had Representative Cozart on, who I call the education guru because in my view he is. But, we had a few discussions in session, Andy, because back when I was in school, I took home ec as an elective back in junior high. And part of that was they taught us some basic cooking skills, right? We baked a cake and we learned to cook. So I went, I was speaking with Bruce about that. And I said, hey, what's the status now of home ec? Did they do it? And apparently they have a class that it'd be akin to learning how to balance a checkbook, right? How credit cards work. Apparently they have that class and the name of it escapes me. But the cooking part of it, from my understanding, has been taken out. Like it's not even it's not even an option for students. And I think that, and I looked into that, and perhaps next session, like I said, Lord willing, reelected, I definitely want to look into that because I think it would be, number one, I think it would be a fun class, and I think it could be needed for these kids who they don't have any guidance at home, and if they were taught some healthy practices and how to cook some healthy dishes or how to cook anything, perhaps I think it could be advantageous to the future of the youth.
Yeah, it's another point about where you can make a difference, and what you learn is really important, right? And so, I think that the sort of the tyranny of the status quo to say, hey, everything we do today in school, we have to keep doing it in the future because somehow it's the right thing. and I think we can say, look, there's problems in our society, whatever it is, that would kind of warrant doing things like this to tell kids, oh, how do you cook the simplest meals, and so because I think we all know that sugar, fat, salt, we're all having too much of it in abundance, and I think that sugar is addictive, and so.
Well, and I'll add to that on the sugar front, and I think that there's been that old saying that basically anything in control is okay, and anything in excess is too much. But Andy, I would invite you in your travels to look up. There's a couple of cases where there was actually a guy. His name was Dr. Fred Hatfield. He was big in the fitness world. He actually trained Evander Holyfield back in the day, and was a big time nutritionist guy, and just a genius level at sports nutrition. Well, he was diagnosed with cancer, and he went on a no sugar diet. Like, he ate meats, vegetables, had a really healthy diet, but he completely cut sugar because, in his view, sugar was the fuel to the fire of cancer. And they gave him a very short time to live. He ended up living 4 years. They didn't think he was going to make it 6 months, and he did that. So to your point on some of these things being bad for you, there's been case after case where sugar has been shown to be the fuel to the fire of cancer.
Yeah. Well, for those out there listening, please comment. Tell us what you think. Do you agree, disagree? Would you have taken the federal funding or no, not taken the federal funding? And why do you think that? And you can comment on this on various social media channels that we're using. And I think, to switch gears a little bit, Matt, I think that we're lining up a number of good guests coming up that have some very interesting backgrounds. So that hopefully will be at the end of this week or the beginning of next week. So until that time, I'll wish you a good day.
Yeah, and please comment below. I think it's a really interesting conversation that Arkansas ranks so high in food insecurity and also obesity. I had some great discussions with my colleagues during the last session, but please comment below, your thoughts, your ideas. Again, this is Free Arkansas. It's the free flow of ideas. And again, we're here to help Arkansans, and here to make things better and solve problems.
Excellent. Have a great day.